I was alone in my apartment when my phone started vibrating across the table. It was 11:55 p.m. Outside, snow was falling quietly over the city, wrapping everything in that soft Christmas silence people write songs about. I had just poured myself a glass of wine, trying to survive what was supposed to be a peaceful holiday, even though my own mother had told me not to come home. Then I saw my sister's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something in my chest tightened, warning me that this call wasn't ordinary. The moment I picked up, her voice exploded through the speaker. "What the hell did you do? Why are there two police cars outside Mom's house?" She was screaming, crying, completely unhinged. Behind her, I could hear chaos doors slamming, people shouting, and the unmistakable sound of sirens cutting through the winter air. "You ruined everything!" she yelled. "You destroyed this family just to get revenge." I havoed. I stood there frozen, listening to her spiral, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a strange, heavy calm. Because that moment didn't start with police cars. It didn't begin tonight. It started months earlier, when my father died. It started when I gave up my career to care for him while she disappeared. It started when my mother asked me to sign away my inheritance. It started when my sister emptied my accounts, stole my identity, tried to have me arrested, and convinced our entire family that I was dangerous. And now, finally, everything she built on lies was collapsing in real time. She kept shouting my name, demanding answers, blaming me for ruining her life. But the truth was simple. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped protecting people who were destroying me. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, if you've ever been painted as the villain while silently bleeding behind the scenes, if you've ever wondered what happens when someone finally chooses themselves over family loyalty, stay with me. Because what led to those police cars, that phone call, and the complete downfall of my sister is a story about betrayal, survival, and the kind of quiet revenge that only truth can deliver. And I promise you this is only the beginning. My name is Piper. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a data analyst. Numbers have always made sense to me. Patterns, logic, systems, those things feel safe, predictable. People, on the other hand, not so much. I'm sharing this story today because for a long time, I believed that loyalty was enough, that if you showed up for family, if you sacrificed, if you stayed when things got hard, it would eventually be returned. I was wrong. And the night my sister called me screaming about police cars was only the final chapter of a much longer betrayal. Let me take you back to where everything truly began. It started with my father. 2 years before he passed away, he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Overnight, my life changed. I took a leave from work, emptied part of my savings, and moved back into my childhood home in Milwaukee to care for him full-time. I handled medications, doctor appointments, physical therapy, late-night emergencies. I learned how to operate medical equipment I never thought I'd touch. I slept on the couch beside his hospital bed so I could hear him breathe. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because I loved him. He was gentle, quiet, the kind of man who fixed broken appliances instead of throwing them away, the kind who believed family was sacred, even when it hurt. During those 2 years, my sister Cynthia was almost completely absent. She lived barely 40 minutes away, yet weeks would pass without a single visit. Sometimes she'd send a short text, sometimes nothing at all. She always had an excuse: work stress, travel, personal problems. I told myself not to judge. Everyone handles grief differently, right? But I was the one changing his sheets. I was the one holding his hand during chemo. I was the one whispering encouragement when he couldn't stand anymore. When he finally passed, I felt hollow. The funeral happened on a gray morning in early fall. I stood beside his casket, feeling like part of my soul had been buried with him. That's when Cynthia reappeared. She arrived wearing a designer coat and expensive sunglasses, looking more like she was attending a fashion event than saying goodbye to her father. She hugged people theatrically, took photos, adjusted her makeup between condolences. She barely looked at me. After the service, while relatives gathered quietly, she cornered me near the reception hall. Not to comfort me, not to thank me. Her first words were, "So, what's happening with Dad's life insurance?" I remember blinking at her in disbelief. I hadn't even processed my father's death yet, but she was already calculating. That moment planted the first seed of unease in my chest. Later that afternoon, we returned to the family house. My mother, Brenda, asked me to join her in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she laid a thick stack of documents on the counter. She told me Cynthia was in serious financial trouble. "Bad investments," she said. "Credit issues. Cash flow problems." Then she looked me straight in the eyes and asked me to sign away my share of the house. She said I was stable, that I had a good career, that Cynthia needed it more. I stared at the paperwork, feeling like the floor had shifted beneath me. This was the home my father worked his entire life to pay off. This was the inheritance he explicitly said should be split between us. I reminded my mother that I had drained thousands of dollars from my own savings to cover medical equipment and private care. She avoided my gaze. And then she said something that still echoes in my mind. "Be the bigger person." I refused. Quietly. Firmly. That refusal changed everything. The air in the house became heavy. Conversations turned cold. Doors started closing harder than necessary. That evening, while searching my father's study for old tax records, I noticed something strange. His glass display case was empty, the vintage watches he had collected over decades gone. I felt a slow chill crawl up my spine. I searched the house until I found Cynthia's designer handbag sitting casually on the hallway table. Inside was a receipt from a high-end pawn shop. Dated 3 days earlier, my sister had started selling my father's belongings before his ashes had even settled. I confronted her in the living room. She didn't deny it. She shrugged and said Dad would have wanted to help her. My mother rushed to defend her. And when I stood my ground, when I refused to sign the house over and expose the theft, my mother slapped me across the face. That was the moment something inside me broke. I walked out into the freezing Milwaukee wind, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last time I would ever see my family as family. I didn't go back to my mother's house after that night. I drove until the streets blurred together, until the anger in my chest burned itself into exhaustion. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I sat there for a long time in silence. Not crying, just staring. Because when your own mother chooses your sister over you, when she justifies theft and violence in the same breath, something fundamental shifts inside you. The girl who believed family meant safety didn't exist anymore. I went inside, locked every door, and collapsed onto my couch. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never allow them to control me again. For the next few weeks, I tried to focus on rebuilding some sense of normalcy. I returned to work. I forced myself into routines. Morning coffee, evening walks, grocery shopping like nothing had happened. But grief doesn't move in straight lines. Some days I missed my father so much it physically hurt. Other days I replayed my mother's slap in my head until my jaw tightened. I didn't speak to either of them. They didn't reach out. It was like I had been erased. About a month after the funeral, something strange started happening with my finances. It began with a notification from my bank about a missed payment on a credit card I didn't recognize. Then another alert. Then a sudden dip in my credit score that made absolutely no sense. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. I called customer service. They listed several accounts under my name that I had never opened. High-interest payday loans, multiple credit cards, balances climbing into the tens of thousands. My stomach dropped. I remember gripping my phone so tightly my fingers hurt. Someone was using my identity, and deep down, I already knew who. I called my closest friend, Leo. Leo works in cybersecurity, and he's the kind of person who sees patterns where others see chaos. I asked him if he could help me figure out what was happening. He didn't hesitate. That evening, he came over with his laptop and spent hours digging through access logs, login timestamps, IP addresses, and digital footprints. At first, neither of us spoke. Then his face slowly changed. "Piper," he said quietly. "You're not going to like this." He turned the screen toward me. There it was. My social security number had been used to open every single account, and the access points traced directly back to my mother's home internet. My sister had been applying for loans in my name while sitting in the house I grew up in. She had racked up massive debt to fund the lifestyle she paraded at our father's funeral. I felt cold all over. Not angry, cold. Leo scrolled further. "She's destroying your credit," he said. "If you don't act now, this could follow you for years. You might never qualify for a mortgage, or even a basic loan." I stared at the screen, numb. My sister hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my future. We kept digging. Bank statements revealed something even worse. My mother had allowed Cynthia to drain what remained of my father's modest retirement account. Money that was meant to support her own aging years. She knew. She watched it happen. And she said nothing. I whispered. She helped her. Leo closed his laptop slowly. Then they both made their choice. That night, something inside me hardened. I stopped hoping for reconciliation. I stopped imagining apologies. I stopped thinking of them as family. Instead, I started thinking in terms of evidence. The next morning, I contacted an attorney named Mr. Vance. He specialized in financial fraud and identity theft. I brought him everything Leo had gathered: transaction histories, IP logs, forged signatures, and timestamps. He reviewed the documents carefully. Then he looked up at me. "This is felony-level identity theft," he said, "and federal fraud. Your sister didn't just cross a line. She sprinted over it." For the first time since my father died, I felt something resembling stability. There was a process. There were laws. There were consequences. We began organizing everything into formal reports. Police affidavits, financial crime documentation, digital forensic packages. While this was happening, Cynthia had the audacity to call me. Her voice was syrupy, fake sweet. She said Mom was struggling with expenses and asked if I could send money. As if she hadn't already stolen tens of thousands from me. As if she hadn't gutted my credit. As if she hadn't turned our mother into an accomplice. I gave her short, neutral answers. I let her believe I was still the same quiet sister who avoided conflict. I needed her confident. I needed her careless. Because people who think they've won tend to make mistakes. Behind the scenes, Mr. Vance filed formal reports with state and federal agencies. Leo helped secure my accounts and freeze any new credit attempts. I started documenting everything, every call, every message, every threat. I also began noticing a shift in the way relatives treated me. Calls stopped. Messages went unanswered. Eventually, I learned why. My sister had started telling everyone I was unstable. That I had attacked her. That I was dangerous. My mother backed her up. They were building a narrative. And I was about to become the villain in a story I didn't even know was being written. But while they were busy destroying my reputation, I was quietly preparing to destroy their lies. And neither of them had any idea what was coming. The first sign that things were about to get much worse came in the form of silence. My phone stopped ringing. Family group chats went quiet. Friends who had checked on me after my dad's funeral suddenly became distant. Messages I sent were left unread. At first, I thought people were just busy. Then I received a call from my aunt. Her voice was tight, cautious, like she was choosing every word carefully. "Piper, your mother told us what happened." I asked her what she meant. She hesitated before saying, "She said you broke into the house, that you attacked Cynthia, that you stole her jewelry." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the wall, trying to process what I had just heard. They hadn't just stolen from me. They were trying to destroy me. Apparently, Cynthia had staged a fake crime scene at my mother's house. A broken window, disheveled furniture, photos of bruises she had inflicted on herself. Then she called the police and claimed I had shown up in a rage, assaulted her, and taken expensive jewelry. It was calculated, cold, brilliantly cruel. She wasn't just covering her financial crimes. She was building a paper trail to paint me as violent, unstable, and untrustworthy, so anything I said about identity theft would sound like retaliation. My mother supported every word of it. She spent days calling relatives, crying dramatically, telling them her eldest daughter had lost control, and turned against the family. She told them I was dangerous, that I needed help, that Cynthia was terrified of me. People I had grown up with started blocking my number. Some sent angry messages telling me I should be ashamed. Others said nothing at all. I was being erased in real time. The social isolation was suffocating. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach dropped. Every unfamiliar number made my chest tighten. I felt like I was walking through my days underwater, struggling to breathe while everyone else moved on as if nothing was wrong. Then my mother initiated a three-way call. She and Cynthia took turns attacking me verbally, their voices overlapping, feeding off each other's rage. "You're a treacherous brat," my mother screamed. "Don't you ever show your face in this house again. If you do this," Cynthia laughed bitterly before adding, "you're going to rot in jail for what you did to me. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I quietly hit record. When there was finally a pause in their insults, I spoke calmly. "The truth will come out, so keep performing while you still can." They went silent for a split second. Then the call ended. A few days later, the consequences hit my professional life. My manager called me into a private meeting. Human Resources had received a packet of evidence police reports, photos of Cynthia's staged injuries, and written statements accusing me of violent behavior. My manager looked genuinely uncomfortable. He told me they had no choice but to place me on immediate unpaid administrative leave while they investigated. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. My income was gone. My reputation was under review. And all of it was based on lies. I went home that afternoon and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. I had done nothing wrong. Yet I was the one losing everything. I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to feel sorry for myself. Then I called Mr. Vance. I handed over everything. Security footage from my apartment complex showing I never left my building that night. GPS data from my car proving I was miles away from my mother's house. Time-stamped grocery receipts. Phone location records. It was airtight. Mr. Vance reviewed the material carefully. "This isn't just identity theft anymore," he said. "They've crossed into filing false police reports and coordinated harassment." I also gave him the recorded phone calls. He nodded slowly. "These will destroy their credibility in court." Meanwhile, Leo continued helping me secure my digital life. Every account was locked down. Fraud alerts were activated. Credit bureaus were notified. Any future attempt to use my identity would trigger immediate flags with financial institutions. But emotionally, I was unraveling. I couldn't sleep. I replayed conversations in my head. I questioned every memory of my childhood, wondering how long my mother had been choosing Cynthia over me. I mourned my father all over again, not just his death, but the way his legacy had been twisted into something ugly. Through relatives, I learned Cynthia was telling people I had always been jealous of her, that I couldn't stand seeing her succeed, that I was trying to sabotage her life. The irony was suffocating. She had stolen my identity, drained my accounts, ruined my credit, tried to have me arrested, and somehow, I was the villain. That's when I realized something terrifying. If I didn't finish this properly, they would never stop. So I made a decision. I stopped reacting emotionally. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already chosen a side. Instead, I focused entirely on strategy. Mr. Vance helped me file a formal identity theft report with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions. We submitted digital forensic evidence linking Cynthia's IP address directly to the fraudulent loan applications. We documented forged signatures. We prepared affidavits. We built a timeline. Every piece of their deception was being carefully stacked into a legal avalanche. While they were busy spreading rumors, I was building a case. While they were trying to destroy my name, I was preparing to take away their freedom. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I let them believe their lies were working. Because sometimes the most powerful move is silence. And at that point, they had no idea how close they were to losing everything. I didn't recognize my own life anymore. Every morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. There was no alarm clock pulling me out of bed, no commute to distract me, no familiar rhythm of spreadsheets and meetings. Being placed on unpaid leave felt like having the floor disappear beneath me while everyone else kept walking. My career, the one stable thing I had built for myself, was suddenly suspended because of lies. I spent hours staring at my laptop, refreshing my bank apps, checking fraud alerts, watching my credit score wobble like it was standing on broken legs. Some nights, I barely slept. Other nights, I slept too much, just to escape the constant noise in my head. And through all of it, my sister kept pretending nothing was happening. She posted smiling photos on social media, luxury dinners, designer outfits, carefully curated captions about gratitude and fresh starts, all paid for with my stolen identity. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went quiet. Mr. Vance advised me to stay invisible for a while. Cynthia was getting reckless, he said. People who believe they've won tend to expose themselves. So I followed his advice and removed myself from anything that could draw attention. I booked a short-term luxury rental downtown in a secure building with controlled access and underground parking. It wasn't cheap, but I needed somewhere safe, somewhere my mother and sister couldn't find me. That apartment became my command center. Glass walls, city lights, silence. I brought only essentials and a small box of my father's belongings, his military medals, a few faded photographs, and one old watch Cynthia hadn't managed to sell yet. Every night, I lined them up on the table and reminded myself why I was fighting. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because they had crossed every boundary. I spent days on the phone with financial institutions, working through endless automated menus and fraud departments. Each call felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. We froze every compromised account, flagged unauthorized devices, set up identity monitoring, placed extended fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. Every attempt Cynthia made to open anything new in my name would now trigger immediate notifications to banks and law enforcement. It was tedious, emotionally draining, but with every confirmation email, I felt a little stronger. Meanwhile, Cynthia kept calling. Her tone shifted between fake concern and entitlement. She complained about household expenses, asked when I was sending money, spoke to me like I was an ATM that had temporarily malfunctioned. I answered politely. Briefly, I let her think I was overwhelmed and scared. I needed her comfortable, because comfort makes people sloppy. Behind the scenes, Mr. Vance finalized the legal filings. The district attorney had accepted the fraud case. The digital evidence Leo had gathered, IP addresses, login timestamps, device fingerprints, created a clear trail directly back to Cynthia. Forged mortgage signatures, unauthorized transfers, identity theft. It was more than enough for arrest warrants. But timing mattered. We wanted everything to happen at once. I also learned that my mother had been telling relatives I was refusing to help financially because I was bitter and selfish. She told them Cynthia was barely surviving, that I had turned my back on the family. No one bothered to ask for my side. At some point, I stopped caring. If they believed lies without hearing the truth, they were never really on my side to begin with. 3 days before Christmas, I sent one final message to my mother. It was short, emotionless. I told her I wouldn't be attending their Christmas Eve gathering and wished them a quiet evening. She didn't reply. But I knew Cynthia would read it as surrender. She had always mistaken silence for weakness. That same day, I compiled a digital dossier. Every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every recorded threat, every forensic log. I organized it neatly into folders and scheduled automatic distribution to Cynthia's creditors and several local news tip lines for the moment law enforcement executed the arrest. I didn't want her rewriting history. I wanted the truth to land everywhere at once. That night, alone in my downtown apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window watching snow drift between skyscrapers. For the first time since my father died, I felt strangely calm. The chaos had burned itself out of me. All that remained was clarity. Mr. Vance called later that evening. His voice was steady. "Everything is approved," he said. "Police and federal investigators are ready. We'll proceed exactly when you requested." I asked him if he was confident. "Absolutely. "The evidence is airtight," he replied. "Your sister is facing multiple felony charges." I closed my eyes. There was no joy in it, just finality. After the call, I opened the small velvet box containing my father's medals and photographs. I held one picture of us together from years ago, back when life was simple, back when family still meant something. "I tried," I whispered into the empty room. Then I placed everything back carefully. I blocked my mother's number, muted Cynthia's. I wanted no distractions when it happened. While they were preparing champagne and decorations, I was preparing closure. They believed they had isolated me. They believed they had won. They had no idea that within 48 hours, their entire world would collapse in front of everyone who had turned against me. And I would finally stop being the daughter who stayed quiet. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. The city was glowing with lights and decorated storefronts, people rushing through snowy sidewalks with wrapped gifts tucked under their arms. Somewhere, families were gathering around dinner tables, pouring wine, laughing, pretending everything was perfect. I watched it all from behind the glass walls of my downtown rental. I hadn't slept much the night before. Not from fear, from anticipation. Everything was already in motion. The reports had been filed. The warrants had been approved. The evidence had been locked into government systems that couldn't be undone. There was nothing left for me to do. Still, I kept myself busy. I cleaned the apartment even though it was already spotless. I reorganized the small box of my father's belongings for the third time. I stocked the fridge with comfort food I probably wouldn't eat. I wanted the space to feel calm, controlled, neutral. This was the first Christmas I wasn't going home. And somehow, it felt lighter. Around mid-afternoon, Leo texted me. "They're on schedule." I replied with a single word. "Thank you." Then I turned off my phone notifications and poured myself a glass of wine. I imagined what was happening at my mother's house. Cynthia had spared no expense for the party. She always loved putting on a show. I knew she would be walking around in something designer, holding court in the living room, telling relatives exaggerated stories about her business success. She would be playing the generous daughter, the survivor, the victim. I could almost see it. Relatives who had blocked my number would be complimenting her outfit. Neighbors would be admiring the decorations. My mother would be hovering nearby, beaming with pride, convinced she had protected her golden child. All funded by stolen money, all built on fraud. While guests arrived and music filled the house, I sat quietly on my couch and watched snow drift past the windows. It was strange how peaceful everything felt. Around 8 p.m., Mr. Vance sent a brief message. "Units are in position." My chest tightened. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I stood up, walked to the window, and rested my forehead against the glass. For a moment, I thought about my father. How he would have hated this. How he believed in forgiveness, even when people didn't deserve it. But I also knew he wouldn't have wanted his life's work stolen and twisted into a weapon against his own daughter. I whispered his name under my breath. Then I sat back down. At my mother's house, the party was reaching its peak. Later, I would learn that Cynthia had just started a toast when the front door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside first, followed by federal investigators in plain clothes. The music was cut. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The lead investigator walked straight into the center of the room and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Cynthia, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal financial fraud and aggravated identity theft." Her face drained of color. She started screaming immediately. She pointed wildly, claiming I had set her up, that I was jealous, that there had been a mistake. Relatives looked around in shock. Someone dropped a glass. My mother began crying hysterically. None of it mattered. The handcuffs closed around Cynthia's wrists with a sharp metallic click that echoed through the decorated living room. Neighbors gathered outside as police escorted her down the driveway toward 2 waiting patrol cars, their red and blue lights reflecting off the fresh snow. The perfect holiday image she had curated shattered in seconds. And then, at exactly 11:55 p.m., my phone vibrated. I already knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. "What the hell did you do?" Cynthia screamed the moment I picked up. "Why are there 2 police cars here? You ruined everything. You destroyed my life. I could hear panic in her voice. Fear. For the first time, she sounded small. I listened quietly while she ranted, blamed me, cursed my name. When she finally paused to breathe, I spoke. Calmly. Steadily. I didn't destroy your life, I said. You did. The moment you decided to steal Dad's money and my identity. She started yelling again. I hung up, blocked her number, and sat back on my couch in silence. The next morning, Milwaukee woke up to heavy snowfall and even heavier consequences. News of Cynthia's arrest spread quickly through family group chats and neighborhood pages. Banks flagged the fraudulent mortgage applications tied to my name. The house was officially sealed due to financial crimes. My mother left frantic voicemails begging me to fix it. She said Cynthia couldn't survive prison. She begged me to withdraw the charges. She cried that I was destroying the family. I answered once. Just once. I told her the truth. That her favoritism had led us here. That protecting Cynthia had cost her everything. She called me heartless. I didn't argue. I simply ended the call. Later that day, I posted the full dossier into our extended family group chat. Every document, every log, every police report. Within minutes, the conversation went silent. No apologies. No explanations. Just quiet. By evening, bank representatives arrived at the house with eviction papers. My mother packed what she could into a few boxes and left under supervision. The home my father worked his entire life to pay for was gone. And I finally understood something. Justice doesn't always feel victorious. Sometimes, it just feels inevitable. The days after Cynthia's arrest felt unreal. It was like the city itself had gone quiet. Snow kept falling across Milwaukee, soft and steady, covering sidewalks and rooftops the same way silence covered my phone. For the first time in months, there were no angry calls from relatives, no threats from my sister, no manipulative messages from my mother. Just stillness. But peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves. The first wave was exhaustion. I slept for nearly 12 hours straight the night after everything collapsed. When I woke up, my body felt heavy, like it had finally put down something it had been carrying for too long. Later that morning, Mr. Vance called to walk me through what would happen next. Cynthia had been formally charged with federal financial fraud and aggravated identity theft. Bail was denied due to the scale of the crime and risk of flight. Her accounts were frozen. Creditors were notified. There would be hearings. There would be sentencing. It was real. My sister wasn't getting out of this. That same afternoon, my mother left me 7 voice messages. I didn't listen to them at first. When I finally did, I sat on the edge of my bed and let her broken voice fill the room. She begged me to help. She said Cynthia was terrified. She promised things would be different. She told me I was destroying the family. Then she cried. A lot. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in. The part of me that had spent years being the responsible one. The fixer. The emotional sponge. But something had changed. I could hear the pattern in her words. She wasn't apologizing for what they did to me. She was grieving the consequences. So I called her back once. Just once. She answered immediately. Piper, she sobbed. Please, I'm on my knees. Tell them there's been a mistake. Cynthia can't survive prison. I closed my eyes. Mom, I said quietly, you watched her steal my identity. You defended her when she sold Dad's things. You let her destroy my life. She gasped, like she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. You're being heartless, she whispered. I took a slow breath. No. I'm being honest, and honesty is the only thing left in this family. Then I hung up. That was the last conversation we ever had. A few hours later, bank representatives arrived at the house with formal eviction paperwork. Since the mortgage had been secured with forged signatures and fraudulent loans, the property was seized immediately. My mother packed her belongings into a few small boxes under supervision. She moved into a government-subsidized senior apartment across town. No savings, no house, no daughters, just consequences. Through my attorney, I learned Cynthia had been placed in county jail while awaiting transfer to a federal facility. She would eventually be sentenced to 3 years. Her designer clothes were replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Her curated online image vanished overnight. She tried to reach me through distant relatives. I didn't respond. Instead, I took one final step to protect myself. I changed my phone number, deleted old social media accounts, instructed Mr. Vance to handle all legal communication. I blocked every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had condemned me without asking for the truth. I didn't announce it. I simply disappeared from their lives. People think cutting off family is dramatic. They don't understand how quiet it actually is. It's just a series of small choices. Not answering, not explaining, not reopening wounds. A few weeks later, I left Milwaukee. I didn't throw a farewell party. I packed my car, took one last look at the skyline, and drove toward a city where nobody knew my last name. Starting over felt terrifying, but also necessary. The first months were hard. I had nightmares about police sirens. I flinched when my phone rang. I questioned every new relationship, wondering when betrayal would show up. But slowly, life began to stabilize. I found a new job. My new coworkers valued my skills instead of exploiting my kindness. My finances recovered. My credit score climbed. I started sleeping through the night. A year has passed now. Cynthia is serving the second year of her sentence. She faces massive debt and a permanent criminal record. My mother lives alone in a small apartment, surrounded by the echoes of choices she can't undo. She reached out once through a relative. I didn't reply, not out of anger, out of self-respect. And me? I've learned that peace isn't loud. It doesn't come with dramatic music or victory speeches. It arrives quietly, in ordinary moments. Making coffee without anxiety, checking my bank account without fear, walking down the street knowing no one is hunting my reputation. I finally understand something my father tried to teach me. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Loyalty without discernment becomes permission for abuse. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you survived. This experience taught me that being an adult with self-respect means choosing truth over comfort, even when it costs you your family. And if sharing my story helps even one person realize they're allowed to protect their own peace, then everything I went through will have meant something. A full year has passed since that Christmas night. Sometimes it still feels unreal that my entire life split into a before and an after. Before the lies, before the police cars, before I learned that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Now, I wake up in a city that doesn't carry the weight of my memories. No one here knows my sister's name. No one associates my face with family drama or whispered accusations. I'm just another woman grabbing coffee on her way to work, another person moving quietly through her own routine. And that anonymity has been a gift. The first few months after I left Milwaukee were the hardest. Trauma doesn't disappear just because you change zip codes. I had trouble sleeping. Sudden noises made my heart race. Every unfamiliar number on my phone triggered a spike of panic, even though I knew Cynthia no longer had access to me. Healing isn't linear. Some days I felt strong. Other days I cried in grocery store parking lots for reasons I couldn't fully explain. But slowly, I began rebuilding. I found a new position as a data analyst at a company that valued integrity. My coworkers treated me with respect. They didn't see me as someone to manipulate or guilt into compliance. They trusted my expertise. That alone felt revolutionary. Financially, things stabilized. With the fraud resolved and my accounts secured, my credit started recovering. For the first time in months, I could plan instead of just survive. I opened a small savings account. I set long-term goals. I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't constantly under threat. Emotionally, I had to learn how to exist without the role I had played my entire life. I had always been the responsible one, the peacemaker, the daughter who stayed. Without that identity, I felt strangely empty at first. But in that emptiness, I discovered space. Space to rest. Space to breathe. Space to figure out who I was when I wasn't being used. Occasionally, updates about my old life reached me through my attorney. Cynthia is now serving the second year of her 3-year sentence for federal financial fraud and aggravated identity theft. The same woman who once strutted through family gatherings in designer clothes now spends her days in a gray concrete facility, facing the reality she tried so hard to outrun. She also carries a mountain of debt that will follow her long after she's released. No more champagne. No more curated social media posts. Just consequences. My mother lives in a government-subsidized senior apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee. She has no house, no savings, and no daughters willing to sacrifice themselves for her anymore. She reached out once through a cousin, asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. Not because I hate her, but because I finally understand that forgiveness doesn't require reconnection. Her regret comes from discomfort, not accountability. And I won't reopen wounds just to make someone else feel less lonely. That was one of the hardest lessons. You don't owe access to people who hurt you, even if they raised you, even if they share your DNA, especially if they've proven they'll destroy you to protect someone else. In quiet moments, I still think about my father. I wonder what he would say if he could see where I am now. I like to believe he would be proud not because I won, but because I chose truth over silence. Because I stopped letting kindness be mistaken for weakness. I keep his medals in a small box beside my bed. Some nights, I take them out and remind myself that strength doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like starting over. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself when no one else will. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior, by respect, by safety. And when those things disappear, you are allowed to leave. My life is quieter now. No constant anxiety. No surprise debts. No emotional ambushes disguised as concern. Just peace. And peace, I've learned, is priceless. If you're listening to this and you're stuck in a situation where people keep crossing your boundaries, using your kindness, or rewriting your reality, please hear this. You are not obligated to stay. You are not cruel for protecting yourself. You are not wrong for choosing stability over chaos. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally decided to live. Sharing this story hasn't been easy, but if it helps even one person recognize their own worth, then it was worth telling. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, boundaries, and quiet justice, please consider subscribing to Hanjiwe Iyagi. Your support allows these stories to be told. Take care of yourself. And remember, your peace matters more than anyone else's comfort. There's a strange moment that happens after everything finally falls apart. It's the moment when the chaos stops, but your body doesn't realize it yet. That's where I lived for a long time. Even after I had moved away. Even after Cynthia was behind bars. Even after my mother was no longer calling. My nervous system stayed on high alert, like it was waiting for the next disaster to arrive. Some mornings I would wake up with my heart racing, convinced I had missed an urgent call or a new threat. I would grab my phone, scrolling through notifications, searching for danger that wasn't there anymore. Trauma has a way of lingering. It doesn't leave just because justice arrives. I started therapy a few months after relocating. At first, I told myself it was just to process things. But very quickly, I realized how deeply everything had carved into me. I talked about my father, about sleeping on the couch beside his hospital bed, about holding his hand when he couldn't speak, about how losing him felt like losing the last safe place in my life. Then I talked about my sister, how she smiled while destroying me, how she played the victim while stealing my identity, how she looked when the handcuffs closed around her wrists. And finally, I talked about my mother. That part was the hardest. Because it wasn't just betrayal, it was abandonment. It was realizing that the person who was supposed to protect me had chosen someone else, again and again, even when it cost me everything. My therapist once asked me, "What do you miss most?" I didn't hesitate. I miss who I was before I learned how disposable I was. That answer surprised me, but it was true. I didn't just lose family. I lost innocence. Over time, I began rebuilding myself in small, quiet ways. I started taking long walks after work, letting the rhythm of my footsteps calm my thoughts. I joined a local yoga studio, not because I was flexible, but because I needed to learn how to breathe again. I cooked real meals instead of surviving on takeout. I bought plants and learned how to keep them alive. It sounds simple, but after living in survival mode for so long, these ordinary things felt revolutionary. At work, I slowly started trusting people again. I allowed myself to laugh in meetings. I accepted praise without immediately feeling suspicious. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. My new colleagues had no idea what I had escaped from. To them, I was just Piper, a data analyst who liked strong coffee and color-coded spreadsheets. And I loved that. Sometimes, I would catch myself waiting for someone to accuse me of something, to twist my words, to manipulate a situation. But it never happened. Healthy environments don't feel dramatic. They feel boring. And boring, I learned, is beautiful. Every few months, my attorney would update me on Cynthia's case. Her appeals were denied. Her sentence stood. She tried to claim she had been pressured. She tried to blame stress. She tried to rewrite history. None of it worked. The evidence was too strong. The digital trail too clear. She would serve her full time. I didn't feel happy about it. I felt empty. Not in a sad way. In a finished way. Like closing a book you never want to reread. My mother's situation remained unchanged. She stayed in her small apartment. She relied on public assistance. She told relatives she didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. But she never once acknowledged her role in it. That's when I finally accepted something I had resisted for years. Some people don't learn. They just age. And acceptance brought me a strange sense of peace. I stopped imagining future conversations. Stopped rehearsing explanations. Stopped hoping for accountability. I let the door close. One evening, about 10 months after everything happened, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the skyline gold and pink. I had just finished a long workday. My phone was quiet. My bank account was stable. My life felt steady. And suddenly, I started crying. Not from sadness, from relief. It hit me all at once. I was safe. No one was stealing from me. No one was lying about me. No one was threatening my livelihood. I had survived something that once felt impossible. I thought about how close I came to losing everything. My career, my reputation, my future, and how quietly I had rebuilt it, piece by piece. That night, I took out my father's medals again. I held them in my hands and whispered thank you, not just to him, to myself, for staying, for fighting, for not becoming bitter, for choosing truth even when it cost me my family. I used to think strength meant enduring anything. Now I know better. Strength is knowing when to walk away. Strength is setting boundaries that hurt in the short term, but save you in the long run. Strength is choosing yourself when no one else will. If you're listening to this and you're trapped in a situation where people keep crossing your lines, rewriting your reality, or draining your spirit, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to build a life that doesn't revolve around other people's chaos. Family does not get a free pass to abuse you. Love does not require self-destruction. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is start over quietly. I didn't get the ending I imagined, but I got something better. I got my life back. And that has been more than enough. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes after everything is finally over. Not the dramatic kind, not the crying on the floor kind. It's quieter than that. It shows up in small moments, like when you realize no one is blowing up your phone anymore, when your calendar suddenly feels empty, when your nervous system finally stops bracing for impact, and you don't know what to do with the silence. That's where I found myself. The chaos had ended. The legal process was moving forward without me. Cynthia was locked into consequences she couldn't talk her way out of. My mother was no longer a presence in my daily life. And for the first time in years, there was no crisis demanding my attention. I didn't realize how addicted I had become to survival mode until it disappeared. At first, I kept expecting something else to go wrong. I would wake up in the middle of the night and check my phone, convinced there had to be another emergency waiting for me. Some new accusation, some new debt, some new lie crawling its way back into my life. But there was nothing, just quiet. I started filling my days with structure again. Work in the mornings, long walks in the evenings. Simple routines that didn't involve managing someone else's emotions or cleaning up another person's mess. I began cooking for myself instead of grabbing whatever was fastest. I learned which grocery store had the best produce. I found a small coffee shop where the barista remembered my order. These tiny choices mattered more than I expected. They reminded me that I belonged to myself again. Every now and then, a memory would sneak up on me. Something random would trigger it, a certain song, a winter smell, a notification sound. Suddenly, I'd be back in my childhood kitchen, hearing my mother tell me to be the bigger person. Or I'd see my sister's smirk in my mind, the way she looked after my mother slapped me. I used to push those memories away. Now I let them pass through. Healing, I learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. My therapist once told me that betrayal trauma hits differently when it comes from family. Because it doesn't just break, trust, it fractures identity. You start questioning your own judgment, your own worth, your own memories. I had spent so many years being the reliable one that I didn't notice how often my needs came last. I thought love meant endurance. I thought loyalty meant silence. I thought strength meant staying. But strength, it turns out, looks a lot like leaving. I also learned something unexpected. Justice doesn't feel the way movies portray it. There was no rush of victory when Cynthia was sentenced. No triumphant moment when my mother lost the house. No dramatic sense of closure. It felt heavy, not because I regretted it, because finality carries weight. These were people I once loved, people I once defended, people I once believed would never intentionally harm me. Letting go of that version of reality was harder than pressing charges. Some evenings, I would sit by my window and watch the city lights flicker on, thinking about how differently things could have gone if even one of them had chosen honesty over entitlement. If my sister had asked for help instead of stealing, if my mother had protected both her daughters instead of enabling one, if anyone had told the truth before it became a legal matter. But wishing doesn't rewrite history. All it does is delay acceptance. So I stopped asking, what if? It's not men, and started asking, what now? What now looked surprisingly ordinary. I rebuilt my credit. I rebuilt my career. I rebuilt my sense of safety. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. I stopped chasing closure from those who never offered accountability. I stopped carrying guilt that wasn't mine. Instead, I focused on creating a life that didn't revolve around damage control. I started saying no without apologizing. I stopped answering questions that felt invasive. I learned to trust my instincts again. And slowly, quietly, I became someone new. Not hardened, just clearer. Sometimes people ask me if I miss them. My sister, my mother. I always pause before answering. Because the honest answer is complicated. I don't miss the manipulation. I don't miss the chaos. I don't miss the constant anxiety of wondering what crisis would arrive next. What I miss is the idea of who they could have been. The family I thought I had. But I've made peace with the fact that potential doesn't outweigh reality. Love doesn't excuse abuse. And shared DNA doesn't give anyone permission to destroy your life. A few weeks ago, I received a message from someone who had heard my story through mutual connections. They said they were struggling with a toxic family situation and didn't know if they had the strength to walk away. I wrote back one sentence. You don't have to be brave forever, just brave long enough to choose yourself. That's all it takes. One decision, one boundary, one moment where you stop sacrificing your future for someone else's comfort. I still carry my father's medals with me. They sit in a small box on my dresser, not as a reminder of loss, but as a reminder of resilience. He taught me, without ever realizing it, that dignity matters, that integrity isn't loud, that doing the right thing doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just gives you peace. And peace, after everything I've been through, is the most valuable thing I own. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of a difficult choice whether to stay silent, whether to protect someone who keeps hurting you, whether to finally walk away, I hope my story gives you clarity. You are allowed to protect your future. You are allowed to demand respect. You are allowed to start over. Even when it's painful. Even when it's lonely. Even when the people who hurt you call you heartless for doing it. Choosing yourself isn't revenge. It's survival. And sometimes, survival is the most powerful form of justice there is. Time has a way of changing the shape of pain. It doesn't erase it. It softens the edges. What once felt sharp and unbearable becomes something you can hold without bleeding. That's where I am now. I don't wake up thinking about police cars anymore. I don't flinch every time my phone vibrates. I don't replay old arguments in my head while brushing my teeth. My life has become quiet in the best possible way. I wake up early, make coffee, and look out at a skyline that doesn't carry ghosts. I go to work where my contributions are valued, where I'm seen as a professional instead of a resource to be exploited. I come home to an apartment that feels safe. There are no hidden agendas here. No emotional traps. Just peace. Occasionally, updates still come through my attorney. Cynthia will complete her sentence next year. She has attempted several appeals, all denied. Her financial obligations will follow her for decades. She will have to rebuild her life from scratch. Without family wealth, without sympathy, and without the ability to manipulate her way out of responsibility. My mother remains in her subsidized apartment. She tells relatives she doesn't understand how everything fell apart. She says she did her best. I don't respond. I've learned that closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. There was a time when I imagined dramatic apologies, tearful confessions, some acknowledgement of wrongdoing. None of that happened. Instead, I got silence. And strangely, that silence taught me more than any apology ever could. It taught me that accountability isn't something you can force out of people. They either have it, or they don't. I stopped waiting for them to become different. I started building a life that didn't depend on them changing. That shift saved me. I began filling my days with things that had nothing to do with survival. I took weekend trips to nearby towns. I joined a small book club. I signed up for a pottery class, even though my first few attempts looked like melted bowls. I started laughing again. Not the nervous kind, the real kind. The kind that surprises you because you forgot what it felt like. One evening, while cleaning out an old storage box, I found a handwritten note my father had left inside a book years ago. It was short, just a few lines. Be kind, be brave, protect your peace. I sat on the floor and cried, because in his own quiet way, he had prepared me for this moment long before I ever needed it. I used to think being strong meant enduring everything, holding families together, absorbing pain, making excuses for people who hurt you. Now I know better. Strength is knowing when enough is enough. Strength is choosing yourself even when it costs you relationships. Strength is walking away without turning bitter. I also learned that revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like stability. Sometimes it looks like waking up without fear. Sometimes it looks like thriving in silence, while the people who tried to destroy you face the consequences of their choices. I didn't scream. I didn't expose them publicly for attention. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I simply told the truth, followed the law, and protected myself. And that was enough. People often ask if I would do anything differently. The honest answer is no. I would still gather evidence. I would still involve professionals. I would still refuse to cover up crimes for the sake of family appearances. And I would still walk away. Because loyalty that requires self-sacrifice isn't loyalty. It's exploitation. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped in a cycle of emotional manipulation, financial abuse, or toxic family dynamics, I want you to know something. You don't have to wait until it gets catastrophic. You don't have to collect proof of everything before you leave. You don't have to justify your boundaries to people who don't respect them. You are allowed to choose peace, even if others call you selfish. Even if they say you've changed. Of course you've changed. You learned. You survived. You grew. That's not betrayal. That's evolution. My story didn't end with reconciliation. It ended with freedom. And that freedom came from making hard decisions, standing in uncomfortable truths, and refusing to let blood ties override basic human decency. I lost a family, but I gained a life. and I would make that trade again without hesitation. If my journey helps even one person realize that they deserve safety, dignity, and peace, then sharing it has been worth it. Thank you for staying with me through every chapter. Thank you for listening. And remember, your well-being matters more than anyone else's denial. Take care of yourself. Always. There's a moment that comes after everything settles. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. It's when you realize that the story no longer owns you. You own the story. That realization didn't arrive all at once for me. It crept in slowly, through ordinary days and small routines. Through mornings where I woke up without dread in my chest. Through evenings where I could sit with my thoughts instead of running from them. For a long time, my identity was built around being useful, being dependable, being the one who stayed. I carried everyone else's emotional weight like it was my responsibility. I thought that was love. Now I understand it was conditioning. Walking away from my family forced me to meet myself in a way I never had before. Without their expectations, without their chaos, without their constant demands, I had to decide who I was on my own terms. At first, that felt terrifying. Then it felt freeing. I began to notice how differently I moved through the world. I spoke more slowly. I listened to my intuition. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped volunteering for emotional labor that wasn't mine. I also stopped trying to correct the narrative. Some relatives still believe my mother's version of events. Some people think I overreacted. Some assume I must be cold for cutting contact. I don't argue. I learned that peace is worth more than being understood by people who never asked for the truth. Every few weeks, my attorney still sends brief updates. Cynthia remains incarcerated. Her attempts to reduce her sentence failed. She has been ordered to repay a portion of the stolen funds, though realistically, she'll never be able to cover the full amount. The woman who once walked into rooms like she owned them now stands in line for meals and phone privileges. She wrote me a letter once. I never opened it, not out of anger, out of self-protection. My mother continues to tell acquaintances that she did everything she could, that she was caught in the middle, that she loves both daughters. But love without accountability is just another form of avoidance. I no longer wait for her to understand that. I stopped hoping for validation from people who watched me burn and called it family loyalty. Instead, I focused on building something new. I redecorated my apartment. I framed photos from trips I took alone. I created rituals that belonged only to me: Sunday morning walks, journaling with coffee, quiet evenings with music playing softly in the background. These small choices became anchors. They reminded me that my life was no longer reactive. It was intentional. Sometimes, strangers reach out after hearing my story. They tell me about siblings who drained their savings, parents who chose favorites, families that protected abusers. They ask me how I found the strength to walk away. I always tell them the same thing. I didn't wake up brave. I woke up tired, tired of being manipulated, tired of sacrificing myself, tired of carrying shame that wasn't mine. That exhaustion became clarity, and clarity became action. I didn't pursue revenge. I pursued safety. I didn't try to punish anyone. I told the truth and let the system do its job. I didn't scream or threaten. I documented. I protected myself. I followed the law. And I let consequences land where they belonged. There's a misconception that justice feels satisfying, that it fills the hole betrayal leaves behind. It doesn't. Justice simply closes a chapter. Healing is what fills the space afterward. Healing looks like rebuilding trust with yourself. It looks like learning that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're care. It looks like recognizing that being related to someone doesn't give them unlimited access to your life. I used to think I needed closure conversations, explanations, final words. But real closure came from watching my life stabilize while theirs unraveled. From realizing I no longer felt afraid. From understanding that I had done everything I could with integrity. That was enough. Some nights, I still think about my father. I imagine what he would say if he could see me now. I think he'd be proud, not because I fought back, but because I stopped letting myself be erased. I keep his watch on my nightstand, not as a reminder of loss, but as proof that I survived, that I chose myself, that I didn't let betrayal define the rest of my life. If you're listening to this and you're standing in the middle of your own storm, please hear me. You don't have to stay where you're being hurt. You don't have to shrink to keep others comfortable. You don't have to carry guilt for setting boundaries. Family should feel safe. Love should feel steady. And if it doesn't, you are allowed to leave. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally respected yourself enough to demand better. I lost people who shared my blood, but I gained peace. And peace has been worth every difficult decision. If my story resonates with you, I hope it reminds you that quiet strength exists, that starting over is possible, and that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is choose your own well-being. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Your time matters. Your peace matters. And your story is still being written. There's a quiet kind of courage that no one talks about. It's not the dramatic kind where you confront someone in public or make bold speeches about boundaries. It's the kind that shows up in ordinary moments, when you choose not to respond to a message that would reopen old wounds, when you walk past a familiar street without turning your head, when you sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of running back to what's familiar. That's the kind of courage I've been learning. After everything happened, I thought the hardest part would be surviving the chaos. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to live without it. For so long, my nervous system had been trained to expect emergencies. I was always waiting for the next accusation, the next financial hit, the next emotional ambush. Even after Cynthia was incarcerated and my mother was no longer part of my life, my body stayed tense, like it didn't believe the danger was really over. Healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in slowly. One day, I realized I hadn't checked my credit score in weeks. Another day, I noticed I was sleeping through the night. Then, there was a morning when I caught myself humming while making coffee. Small things, but they mattered. I started paying attention to what made me feel grounded. Long walks after work, writing in a notebook instead of scrolling on my phone, sitting by the window at night and watching the city lights come alive. These became my anchors. I also began setting boundaries in ways that felt unfamiliar at first. When coworkers asked for favors that crossed into emotional territory, I politely declined. When acquaintances tried to pry into my past, I changed the subject. When relatives reached out indirectly, testing whether I was open to reconnecting, I didn't engage. I stopped explaining myself. That was new. Before, I had always felt obligated to justify my choices, especially to family. I thought being understood was necessary for peace. Now I know peace doesn't require permission. It requires consistency. There were moments when guilt tried to creep back in. Late at night, I'd replay memories of my mother holding me as a child, or my sister and I laughing over something small years ago. Those memories would whisper that maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should try again. Maybe I owed them one more chance. But then I would remember the forged documents, the stolen identity, the staged crime scene, the lies that nearly cost me my career. And I would remind myself that nostalgia doesn't erase reality. You can honor what once was without returning to what broke you. One afternoon, while reorganizing my apartment, I found an old journal from years ago. I flipped through pages, filled with lists, goals, and little notes to myself. In the margins, I saw how often I had written things like, "Be patient, try harder, and don't upset anyone." Adia, I stobit. I stared at those words for a long time. I realized how deeply I had been conditioned to prioritize harmony over truth, to keep the peace even when it cost me everything. That version of me did her best. But she was tired, so I thanked her quietly and let her go. These days, my life looks simple from the outside. I go to work. I come home. I make dinner. I talk to a small circle of people who treat me with respect. There are no dramatic confrontations, no constant emergencies, no emotional landmines hidden in everyday conversations. Just stability. And stability feels luxurious after surviving chaos. Every now and then, my attorney still sends updates. Cynthia remains in custody. Her behavior in prison hasn't helped her case. She continues to deny responsibility, framing herself as misunderstood rather than accountable. My mother hasn't changed much either. She still tells anyone who will listen that she was caught in the middle, that she tried to keep the family together. I don't correct her. I don't defend myself anymore. I let people believe what they want. Because I know the truth. And I know how hard I fought to protect it. There's something powerful about no longer needing to convince anyone of your reality. You stop performing. You stop proving. You simply live. Sometimes, when I think about everything that happened, I feel a quiet sadness. Not for what I lost, but for what could have been if honesty had arrived sooner. If my sister had chosen accountability, if my mother had chosen fairness, if love had shown up instead of favoritism. But sadness doesn't live here permanently. It visits, then it leaves. In its place, there's gratitude. Gratitude for the friends who stood by me. Gratitude for professionals who took my case seriously. Gratitude for my own resilience. And gratitude for the version of myself who refused to stay silent when silence would have destroyed me. I've learned that family is not defined by blood. It's defined by behavior, by consistency, by safety. Anyone can share your DNA. Not everyone deserves access to your life. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped in cycles of guilt, obligation, or emotional manipulation, I want you to hear something clearly. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you. You are allowed to build a life that feels calm instead of chaotic. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you human. I didn't get closure in the form of apologies. I didn't get redemption arcs or heartfelt reunions. What I got was something far more valuable. I got my peace. I got my future. And I got the chance to become someone who no longer measures her worth by how much she can endure. My story didn't end with reconciliation. It ended with clarity. And clarity gave me the courage to keep moving forward, even when the path felt lonely. Because sometimes, walking alone is better than standing still in a place that keeps hurting you. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the most loving thing you'll ever do. There comes a point in healing when you stop measuring time by what happened to you and start measuring it by what you're building. I didn't notice when that shift happened. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with some big realization. One day, I just realized I hadn't thought about my sister in weeks. And that felt like progress. My life has become quietly full, not in the flashy way people post online. In the steady way that comes from routines you trust and people who don't make you anxious. I wake up early now, not because I have to, but because I like the calm of mornings. I drink coffee by the window. I review my tasks for the day. I go to work and solve problems that don't involve emotional landmines or financial disasters. After everything I went through, that kind of normal feels extraordinary. I've learned to listen to my body again. When something feels off, I don't override it. When I feel tired, I rest. When I feel overwhelmed, I slow down. Before, I would push through everything. I thought endurance was strength. Now I know that self-awareness is strength. I also started reconnecting with parts of myself I had neglected for years. I picked up journaling again. I joined a local hiking group. I signed up for a weekend art workshop even though I hadn't touched a paintbrush since college. These weren't hobbies. They were acts of reclamation. They reminded me that my life isn't defined by what I survived. It's defined by what I choose next. Every so often, someone from my past still tries to reach out through mutual connections. They ask if I'd consider talking to my mother, if I'd be open to forgiving my sister. I always give the same answer. I've forgiven them in my own way. But forgiveness doesn't require access. It doesn't mean reopening doors that were closed for a reason. It simply means I no longer carry their choices inside my body. That boundary has been one of the most liberating things I've ever learned. Forgiveness is internal. Reconciliation is optional. There's a difference. I don't hate my sister. I pity the part of her that thought stealing and lying would fix her life. I don't resent my mother anymore. I mourn the version of her that could have chosen differently. But I also accept that neither of them is capable of showing up in a healthy way. And acceptance doesn't require proximity. Occasionally, I receive updates from my attorney. Cynthia's release date hasn't changed. She remains uncooperative in rehabilitation programs. She still frames herself as misunderstood. Some people never learn. They just repeat patterns until consequences arrive. My mother continues living quietly, telling anyone who will listen that she lost everything. She speaks about her situation as if it happened to her, not as something she participated in. That used to make me angry. Now it just makes me tired. I no longer feel responsible for teaching grown adults how accountability works. That's not my job. My job is to live. There was a moment recently that really stayed with me. I was walking home from work, and I passed a woman arguing loudly on her phone. She sounded desperate, apologizing over and over, promising she would fix things, begging someone not to be mad at her. I stopped for a second and listened, and I realized that used to be me. Always apologizing, always smoothing things over, always trying to be the bridge between other people's chaos. I felt a wave of compassion for that version of myself. Then I kept walking. That's what growth looks like. Not anger, not bitterness, just moving forward. I've also learned that safety feels boring to people who grew up in chaos. At first, the quiet of my new life felt uncomfortable. There were no emotional roller coasters, no dramatic confrontations, no urgent crises, just consistency. But over time, consistency became my favorite thing. I learned to love predictable days, stable relationships, conversations that don't leave me questioning my reality. I learned that peace isn't empty, it's spacious. It gives you room to breathe, to dream, to become someone new. I still carry my father's watch with me. Sometimes I wear it. Sometimes I just hold it in my hand. It reminds me of where I came from. It reminds me that I kept my promise to protect what mattered. It reminds me that I didn't let greed and manipulation erase his legacy or my future. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. Family loyalty without truth becomes permission for abuse. And silence only protects the people who benefit from it. Speaking up saved my life. Walking away preserved it. I know there are people listening right now who recognize parts of themselves in this story. People who feel trapped by guilt. People who keep hoping things will change. People who are afraid of what walking away might cost. I won't tell you it's easy. It's not. You will grieve. You will question yourself. You will have moments where you wonder if you made the right choice. But you will also find something on the other side. Clarity, strength, peace. You will discover who you are when you're no longer carrying everyone else's burdens. And that version of you deserves a chance to exist. My story didn't end with apologies or reconciliation. It ended with me, standing in my own life, finally whole. And if that's possible for me, it's possible for you too. There's a certain kind of peace that only comes after you've walked through something that almost breaks you. It doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in quietly, like sunlight filling a room you didn't realize had been dark for a long time. That's how it feels now. I don't measure my life by what happened anymore. I measure it by how far I've come. There was a time when I thought healing meant understanding every detail of what went wrong. I replayed conversations in my head, analyzed motivations, and tried to find the moment when everything could have been different. But eventually, I realized that healing isn't about solving the past. It's about choosing the present. These days, my life moves at a gentler pace. I still work as a data analyst, still find comfort in numbers and patterns, but outside of work, I've created a world that feels safe. I cook meals slowly. I take evening walks. I listen to music while folding laundry. Ordinary moments that once felt insignificant now feel precious. After living in constant tension, calm becomes sacred. Sometimes, I think about that night when my sister called me screaming about police cars. The chaos, the accusations, the panic in her voice. It feels like it happened to someone else. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've grown beyond it. I don't carry that version of myself anymore, the one who absorbed abuse in silence, who believed loyalty required self-sacrifice, who thought family ties justified everything. That woman didn't disappear. She evolved. I still get updates through my attorney from time to time. Cynthia remains in custody. Her sentence hasn't changed. She continues to struggle with accountability, still framing herself as misunderstood rather than responsible. My mother continues living quietly, telling people she lost her home and her family, rarely acknowledging why. I don't follow their lives closely. I don't need to. What matters is that I'm no longer entangled in them. There was a period when I wondered if walking away made me cold, if choosing myself over blood made me heartless. But then, I remember how close I came to losing everything: my career, my financial future, my reputation, my sense of safety. And I understand that choosing myself wasn't cruelty. It was survival. One afternoon recently, I took out my father's medals and laid them on the table beside his watch. I sat there for a long time, tracing the edges of metal worn smooth by time. I told him out loud that I was okay, that I had protected what mattered, that I had finally learned to stand up for myself. It might sound strange to talk to someone who isn't there anymore, but grief doesn't disappear. It transforms. And sometimes, speaking your truth into quiet spaces is how you heal. I used to think being strong meant enduring pain without complaint. Now I know strength looks different. Strength is walking away from people who hurt you. Strength is telling the truth even when it costs you relationships. Strength is choosing peace over familiarity. I've also learned that justice doesn't always feel triumphant. There were no fireworks when Cynthia was sentenced. No moment of victory when my mother lost the house. Just a deep, heavy stillness. Justice didn't bring joy. It brought closure. And closure made room for healing. I didn't set out to ruin anyone's life. I set out to protect mine. That distinction matters. I followed the law. I gathered evidence. I told the truth. Everything that happened afterward was the natural consequence of choices that weren't mine. People sometimes confuse boundaries with punishment. They aren't the same. Boundaries are about self-respect. Punishment is about control. I wasn't trying to control anyone. I was reclaiming my autonomy. And that changed everything. These days, I find joy in simple things. A warm cup of coffee. A good book. A quiet evening with no drama waiting around the corner. I've learned to trust my instincts again. When something feels wrong, I don't dismiss it. When someone shows me who they are, I believe them. And when my body asks for rest, I give it permission. If you had told me a year ago that I would feel this grounded, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I was just trying to survive. Now, I'm living. I know there are people listening who are still in the middle of their own storms. People who are afraid to set boundaries. People who are being guilted into staying in unhealthy situations. People who are carrying more than their share of emotional weight. I want you to know something. You don't have to earn the right to feel safe. You don't have to justify your need for peace. You don't have to keep sacrificing yourself to prove your loyalty. Family is supposed to be a place of care, not control. Love is supposed to be steady, not destructive. And if someone repeatedly hurts you, you are allowed to leave. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally chose yourself. My story didn't end with reconciliation. It ended with clarity, with boundaries, with a life that feels like my own. And while I wish things could have been different, I don't regret the path that brought me here. Because on the other side of betrayal, I found something I never expected: freedom. There's a moment that comes after you've told your story enough times, even just in your own head. It's the moment when you realize you're no longer telling it to understand what happened. You're telling it to honor how far you've come. That's where I am now. I don't relive the betrayal anymore. I don't replay every argument or analyze every decision. Those chapters are closed. What remains is perspective, the kind that only comes from walking through something painful and choosing not to let it define you. I've learned that healing doesn't mean pretending it never hurt. It means carrying the experience with wisdom instead of resentment. I still think about my father sometimes, especially on quiet evenings when the city slows down. I imagine what he would say if he could see my life now. I believe he would tell me that he's proud not because I fought back, but because I protected my future. He taught me integrity in ways I didn't understand until everything fell apart. I used to believe family meant enduring anything. Now I understand that family should never require you to disappear. My sister is still serving her sentence. She will be released eventually, but she will carry the consequences of her choices long after that. My mother continues living quietly, separated from the life she once had. Their world changed forever. So did mine. But the difference is this: I rebuilt. I didn't stay frozen in bitterness or revenge. I didn't let their actions harden me. I chose growth. I chose peace. I chose to become someone stronger, softer, and wiser at the same time. That took work. It meant sitting with uncomfortable emotions instead of numbing them. It meant forgiving without reconnecting. It meant learning how to trust again, slowly and carefully. It meant redefining what love looks like in my life. These days, my life feels grounded. I have friendships that feel safe, work that feels meaningful, quiet mornings and calm evenings. I don't live waiting for the next disaster. I live in the present. And that is something I never thought I'd be able to say. If there's one lesson I carry with me above all others, it's this. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. You can be compassionate and still protect yourself. You can love people from a distance. You can walk away without hating anyone. You are allowed to prioritize your own well-being. I know some of you listening right now are standing in impossible situations. Maybe it's a sibling who keeps crossing lines. Maybe it's a parent who refuses to see your pain. Maybe it's a family dynamic that's been toxic for years, and you're exhausted from holding everything together. I want you to hear this clearly. You don't have to stay in places that break you. You don't have to earn respect by suffering. You don't have to shrink yourself to keep peace for others. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally chose honesty over denial, courage over comfort, yourself over expectations. And that choice can change everything. My story didn't end with apologies. It didn't end with reunions. It ended with something much more powerful. It ended with freedom. Freedom to wake up without fear. Freedom to trust my instincts. Freedom to build a life that feels safe and real. Freedom to stop carrying guilt that never belonged to me. If sharing my journey helps even one person feel less alone, then it was worth telling. Because stories like this aren't just about revenge or justice. They're about resilience. They're about boundaries. They're about reclaiming your life when others try to take it from you. Thank you for staying with me through every chapter of this journey. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Hanjiwi Iyagi and joining our community. Your support allows me to keep sharing stories of strength, healing, and quiet justice. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved to protect yourself? Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and remember, your story is still being written. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that sometimes the hardest battles aren't with strangers. They're with the people who are supposed to love us the most. This wasn't just a story about betrayal, fraud, or legal consequences. It was a story about boundaries, about learning that kindness doesn't mean allowing yourself to be destroyed, about realizing that walking away from toxic family dynamics isn't weakness, it's courage. What happened to me forced me to grow in ways I never imagined. I lost people I shared blood with, but I gained something far more valuable: clarity, self-respect, and peace. And if you're listening to this while facing your own difficult situation, I hope you remember this: you are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to protect your future. Your well-being matters. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Revenge Tale Network. Your support helps keep these real, emotional journeys alive and allows us to share more stories about resilience, healing, and quiet justice. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for walking this journey with me. Until next time, take care of your heart and protect your peace.